Greetings, Starfighters. Welcome to the next episode of Shameless Cashgrab. 6 episodes in, so we are definitely trudging along. We are more than a fourth of the way through. Well, trudging isn't fair. Only a couple of these movies I would say were really bad. But up next we have Blood of Dracula's Castle from 1969. Nice. Hopefully this one has a little bit more Dracula in it than the last movie on the set that had the word Dracula in the title. I mean, hell, the Dracula knockoff had more Dracula in it.
Well, I can honestly say this movie has a little bit more Dracula in it than Count Dracula and his Vampire Bride. 1969, Blood of Dracula's Castle. Okay, here we go. Plot summary, courtesy of IMDb. Count Dracula and his wife capture beautiful young women and chain them in their dungeon to be used when they need to satisfy their thirst for blood. Straightforward enough. I don't know how fair my comments about this film will be. Lucky for me, these videos aren't reviews then, huh? But what I am referring to is a problem that hit me right in the face from second one of this film, and that problem is, the print that Mill Creek used for this DVD is atrocious. Scratched all to hell, and the scratches show up on screen as a less than pleasing shade of green. To call it distracting would be a bit of an understatement. At least the song playing over the opening part of the movie is kind of cool. I can't give it too much praise, as parts of it are a bit more repetitive than they need to be. I mean, I'm not a music critic. Anyone who listened to my old One Hit Wonder podcast can tell you that. But I feel fairly certain that the singer didn't need to use the phrase "next train out" as many times in the chorus as he did. Not saying he should have only used it once, or even just twice, just go with me on that. But even still, seeing as our first major act of the film is a woman screaming and passing out at the mere sight of a taller-than-average and mildly disfigured dude, I am not confident that this would be a good film even with a clean transfer. But, you know what? Only just started. This is only about 3 minutes in. So we get to the credits, and the movie lists John Carradine as its main star. So he'll probably be in it for at least 5 minutes. There will be a link in the show notes in case you don't get that joke. But after the big guy has carried off the fainting lady and the credits, we get SeaWorld. Or rather, an equivalent thereof. Quite a non sequitur there. From a big guy who is probably Dracula's henchman in a forest to dolphins performing in front of a crowd. A small crowd, too, based on the majority of seats being empty. Maybe this is taking place on a weekday. It's here we meet our main protagonists, an obnoxious couple who I already don't like, named Liz and Glenn. She's a model, and he's her fiancé, and also a photographer. I guess they're doing a photo shoot at this SeaWorld equivalent. With only one camera. And he's by himself. Pretty sure that wasn't standard even in the 60s, but what do I know? I almost tried to get a job at a family photography studio, and they turned me down because I failed the math portion of the application. Apparently one needs to be able to know algebra to be able to wave a toy at a toddler. Anyway, at the end of this segment, which goes on for 5 frickin' minutes, Glenn gets a telegram but decides to take a ride on a tower elevator type thingy with Liz before actually telling her what's in it. And that is that his Uncle Thomas has died at 108 years old. Impressive. And that Glenn has inherited said uncle's castle. Anyway, Glenn mentions that the castle is currently being rented by a couple called the Townsends. Fairly quickly, we jump to the Townsends at the castle, and all I can say is, holy dime store Gomez and Morticia ripoffs, Batman. They are talking amongst themselves about possibly having to leave the castle after having lived there for 6 years, although, based on comments made elsewhere in the movie, 6 seems awfully short, but moving on. We cut to their butler, played by John Carradine, and the tall, ugly guy from earlier, in the basement of the title castle, with the woman from the intro chained to the wall, and we hear the butler say the tall guy's name, and it's... Okay, movie. How? can I possibly take you seriously when your giant silent henchman character is named Mango? I am not kidding. The butler tells the abducted woman from earlier that she's there because she saw Mango. Okay, if this movie was intended to be a comedy, I can let this go. But if they were aiming for straight horror here, even cheap straight horror, they honestly lost me at Mango. But anyway, John Carradine takes a blood sample from the kidnapped woman before putting it in a drinking glass on a tray to take upstairs to the Townsends. Or, rather, Dracula and his wife, as the movie will reveal later, and as was already revealed in the plot summary, and casually walks away, and as the camera follows him, we see two other women chained to the same wall. Pictures can't really convey this, but I must say the shot was very well framed. The reveal was a legitimate surprise, but doesn't feel shoehorned in, and Carradine's blasé behavior as he walks past them carrying a glass of blood on a silver tray is darkly humorous. So maybe this was supposed to be a comedy. Oh, right, I said I'd use characters' names more often. Okay, John Carradine's butler character in the movie is named George. I shall attempt to refer to him as such from here on out. After some minor continuity gaffes that, if this were a lesser YouTube channel, would lead to me screaming about how the movie is ruined, and anyone who likes it must be mentally ill, we learned that Dracula and his wife, and, oh, by the way, how funny is it that this set has a movie titled Count Dracula and His Vampire Bride, and it isn't this one? Anyway, we learned they have a son, or at least I assume he's their son based on the dialogue, named Johnny, and it's implied he's a werewolf. I think this movie just turned into an R-rated version of The Munsters. I am surprisingly okay with that. Well, maybe not that surprising. I still think that Brian Fuller's Mockingbird Lane should have been picked up for a full series. So Johnny was in prison, and the Count and his wife bribed a guard to help Johnny escape. Johnny then ends up killing the guard with some laughably bad punching sound effects filmed at an awkward angle, and we cut back to the castle and to the Draculas. That's not what the movie calls them, I'm calling them that, and you can't stop me. So the Draculas go down to see the new girl from the beginning of the movie that Mango had brought in, and to thank him for the fresh supply of blood, they offer him one of the other women on the wall who we didn't see earlier, and no, the movie went there. Oh God. They don't show it, thank goodness, but the implication isn't exactly subtle. Fucking hell, I'd really hoped we'd not have to deal with rape scenes again after Warriors of the Wasteland. I mean, at least that movie took it somewhat seriously. Here, on the other hand, okay, now I'm back to hoping that this wasn't intended as comedy and it's just bad horror. You know, I'm not gonna lie, the film scratches and the bad Bela Lugosi impression from the actor playing Dracula aside, I was actually kind of enjoying the movie somewhat up to this point. But then Mango, still it's named Mango, carries the screaming woman off into the darkness after being described as a gift. And then, of course, the implication that this is immediately followed by Mango killing her since, you know, the Draculas don't want anybody to know their secret, and I'm not gonna lie. I was tempted to just stop the movie right at this point. I don't think I have turned against a movie this quickly in the admittedly short history of Shameless Cashgrab. I mean, I was already kind of lukewarm on Warriors of the Wasteland when that happened. And Love Lines, that wasn't a rape sequence, I'm just talking about how fast I start to dislike the movie. Love Lines, it was less than a minute in before it made me hate it, so I was already starting from neutral. Blood of Castle Dracula, I was having fun up until this point. I mean, fucking hell. I mean, maybe I could have given it a sliver of slack had the scene been taken seriously and not just used as a throwaway to justify Mango exiting the scene. Look, it's a vampire movie. Odds are that most or all of these young women would be dead by the end anyway. That's just how these things go. It's problematic, to be sure, but there's levels to these kinds of things. There's to borrow from an old Tumblr meme, that's not great, but I can let it slide. And then there's holy fucking Satan's asshole. With one scene, this movie has launched itself towards that Satan's asshole side of the spectrum. No matter how much it improves from this point, and that's if it improves, it will always be closer to Satan's asshole than to I can let it slide. It almost doesn't even matter that the film print quality gets even worse after this point, after the Draculas have gone to bed. Alright, I finished Warriors, I finished Love Lines, I finished My Mom's a Werewolf, I can finish this damn thing. I'll just try to go as quickly as possible. The sooner I can end this episode, the sooner I can take a hot shower. I may sound like I'm exaggerating for comedic effect, and maybe I am at a subconscious level, but I don't think so. It truly is astonishing just how rapidly this movie goes from darkly funny to outright cruel. It's like if Eli Roth tried to do a remake of a Coen Brothers movie. It took literally seconds to go from me considering putting it behind Nosferatu, and up in the top of the list, to it being a contender for the bottom spot. Oh, hey, I guess Johnny's not a werewolf, just a homicidal maniac. No, not that one. But this is actually a good thing, because it means I no longer am associating this movie with the Munsters. The Munsters deserve better than that. He, meaning Johnny, makes it to the castle after a way too long escape sequence, and I realize we haven't actually seen our protagonist couple for about 20 minutes now. They weren't the most likable characters, but honestly I'd rather be spending time with them at this point in the movie. I was wrong about Johnny being their son too, by the way, so I'm not sure exactly how they know him, but I guess that they eventually plan to turn Johnny into a vampire, and he's cool with this arrangement. In fact, it may have even been his idea. So Glenn and Liz, the protagonist couple, finally arrive at the titular castle, and the geography of the place becomes confusing while the score becomes louder. As if I didn't have enough reasons to be annoyed with this movie. During a conversation between the Draculas and Johnny, Dracula's wife theorizes that one day modern science might invent synthetic blood, and she and Dracula can, and I quote, become law-abiding citizens again. So, I guess we know where the idea for the Sookie Stackhouse novels came from. They also tell Johnny to come up with some way to dispose of Glenn and Liz, who want them to move out of the castle now that Uncle Thomas has died, in a way that won't draw the police to the castle. I'd insert a What We Do in the Shadows clip here, but I actually like that movie, so I won't sully it by association with this one. This is followed by a sequence of the Draculas and Johnny trying to convince Glenn and Liz to not take the castle, which succeeds, ending the movie after only 44 minutes. If only. So yeah, another implied rape and murder by Mango. Yay. The protagonists do dumb things to move the plot along. Yada yada. Glenn and Liz find the women chained up in the basement, and that the Townsends are vampires much earlier than I expected. And, okay, credit where credit is due. There's a pretty funny moment after Glenn and Liz open the coffins, after seeing the marks on the women who've been having their blood drained for days. Glenn goes, I'm sure there's a perfectly sane and rational explanation for this whole thing, setting up the cliche of skepticism beyond reason you see in these movies sometimes, or, as we call it in the 2010s, being a YouTube atheist. And Liz, on the verge of panicking, says, I'd like to hear it, to which Glenn says, totally deadpan, well, they're vampires, what else? Very well, movie, you get 1 point. We follow that up with an unintentional laugh in the form of one of the worst choreographed fight scenes I've ever seen, and apparently there's to be a human sacrifice because without any setup whatsoever, the Draculas have a religion. The great moon god Luna, who they refer to with male pronouns in this movie because, you can't let women have anything, can you? We also get some pointless backstory for Johnny, informing the audience of his misogyny, because, his wanton murder of at least 3 people on screen, and his desire to become a vampire didn't make it clear enough that he isn't one of the heroes of the movie. And apparently the sacrifice involves burning at the stake. Okay, I didn't see that coming. And with vampires, you'd figure it would involve some kind of bloodletting, with a knife perhaps. Kind of like the sacrifice scene in Count Dracula and his Vampire Bride. Now that I think about it, there's another point I can give to this movie, because the sacrifice scene in that other movie didn't actually go anywhere, whereas here it sets up the last act. So, well, points for that, I guess. But, yeah, the kidnapped woman, her name's Anne, from the opening act is dead now. And the Draculas are keeping Glenn and Liz alive so they can sign a bill of sale for the castle, under duress of course, and to keep them alive for blood instead of just killing them outright. So their escape is pretty much inevitable. All that remains is to see how they kill the Draculas, Johnny, George the Butler, and Mango. I still can't get over the fact that the guy's name is Mango. I thought Count Frankenhausen from a couple of movies ago was silly, but yikes. Oh, and that, and also if the 2 remaining kidnapped victims also make it out alive. Or if any of them get a line. Spoiler, one of them does get a line. Delivered so badly, I now understand why they didn't have her talk for the rest of the movie. So, first bad guy to die is Johnny. Dumbass left a gun in his pants and stood close enough for Liz to grab it and hand it off to Glenn, who shoots Johnny during the struggle. While the vampires and their butler stand there doing approximately fuck and all. Apparently, vampires in the universe of this film get the immortality, but nothing else. Seems like a bit of a rip-off if you ask me. The Draculas are basically helpless as Glenn ties them up while Liz holds a gun, badly, on them. Seriously, I've never owned a gun and I hate the NRA, and even I know that if she tried to fire it holding it like that, the kickback would break her jaw. The most the freaking vampires in this movie offer in terms of resistance is stern disapproval. Man, no wonder they needed the Butler and Mango around. These vampires could have been taken out by a Boy Scout troop. Speaking of George the Butler, he is the next to go, dying from a fall so short that the hero had literally jumped down from that exact same height less than a minute earlier and was fine. I mean, I guess it's possible he hit his head in just the wrong way, and it is a stone floor. And it's still kind of ridiculous, though, especially the way it's shot. Next up, the Draculas, after Glenn has freed the other 2 kidnapped victims. They offer to pay Glenn as much money as he wants as long as he lets them go back to their coffins before sunrise. That works about as well as you'd expect, so we briefly see the 2 in old age makeup, and I mean really briefly, sort of blink and you'll miss it. Then the camera cuts to Glenn and Liz narrating their deaths. Narrating the Dracula's deaths. They don't actually show us, it's narrated to us. The camera only returns to where the 2 of them were sitting once they've completely turned into dust. The chairs are just filled with dusty clothes. I get that they were on a budget. I'm not unsympathetic, but even a bad dissolving effect would have been better than this. Also, why did they dissolve? They didn't get any sunlight on them, and the movie showed that it hadn't been that long since they'd had any blood. They just age about 300 years in 10 seconds, off camera. As Alison Pregler would say, makes it easy. Oh, and then some bats fly out of their clothes. Why? Fuck if I know. We were just told that they turned into dust, so were those bats inside of them? Like a Kinder Egg or something? So that just leaves Mango. He comes upstairs, sees the Draculas and Johnny dead, and lumbers towards Glenn, who shoots him. And nothing happens. So everybody runs. Mango chases, Glenn shoots him 3 more times, and all this does is slow Mango down a little more. Why wasn't he the main bad guy of this movie? He's an actual threat. Glenn then throws the gun at Mango. A 6-shooter gun, by the way. After shooting Johnny once and Mango 4 times. I think you see the problem here. Mango manages to catch up with them and manages to knock Glenn briefly unconscious and carry Liz off. In a better movie, this might have actually been exciting, but apparently they couldn't afford a decent fight choreographer and didn't want to risk either Liz or Mango's actors getting hurt, so her resistance comes across as just embarrassing, as Mango carries her to where the sacrifice from earlier in the film took place and ties her wrists to the wood pole that looks surprisingly unburnt for something that had just been on fire less than a half hour ago. And if this all seems like nitpicking to you, It is, but this movie is not good enough to get a pass on that kind of thing. Glenn eventually catches up, and Mango just happens to knock Glenn into the dirt next to an axe. The axe goes into Mango's back, but he still keeps going. But no, we need more, so Glenn gets the can of gas that Mango is using and pours it on Mango's clothes and grabs the torch that Mango, and God, I don't think I've used the word mango that many times in a sentence before, the torch that he was going to use to burn Liz, and sets Mango's pants on fire. God, that is such a weird sentence, while he's fumbling around trying to get the axe out of his back. But it still isn't over, as we need time for the on-fire, axe-in-back Mango to stumble to the edge of the cliff and finally fall to his death. This is like Paul Rubin's death scene in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, only not even remotely funny. The end. Thank goodness. You know, for a movie called Blood of Castle Dracula, Dracula doesn't actually do much. His henchmen basically do all the work for him and are clearly more competent than he is. If this was supposed to be a metaphor for the idle rich, Andy Warhol did that better in his Dracula movie. At least this Dracula got more lines than Christopher Lee's did back in that movie. Slight side note before we go into the random thoughts. I found out about this after I'd already completed the script for this episode. Apparently there are some versions of the film where they insert very badly made shots of what's supposed to be a werewolf. Apparently, some distributors thought that Johnny was a werewolf, but because the original cut of the film didn't have any scenes showing him as one, they decided to make their own. I saw a screenshot of it, and it looked ridiculous. But since it wasn't in this movie, I'm not using it. Okay, so, random thoughts I had while watching the film. Some of the score in this movie sounds really familiar, like I've heard it used in other movies and TV shows before. I'm just not sure where. The actor playing Dracula can play charming well enough on his own, but when he's acting up against the actress playing his wife or up against John Carradine, he just flounders. Final verdict. If for whatever reasons implied rape and murder scenes that don't really further the plot all that much aren't a deal breaker for you, you might enjoy this movie as a dark comedy, and I won't tell you that you can't. I will simply sigh and go, well, at least find a better transfer of it than I got. As for me, I'm just glad I'll never have to see this thing again. Honestly, the worst part of it is the casualness of it all. Again, like I said earlier, much as the scene in Warriors of the Wasteland bothered me, at least it wasn't treated as a throwaway. At least we had names for everyone involved. I won't say Blood of Dracula's Castle is going to be at the bottom of the list come the Season 3 wrap-up, but that's only because we aren't even halfway through the set yet. A movie that's just plain bad all the way through has an equal chance of ending up at the bottom as a movie that was just fine until it took a sharp turn. So, up next, we have another movie with Castle in the title, Nightmare Castle from 1965, but before we get to that episode, you might want to follow me on Twitter, at Arkle, by the way, I'm going to be making a little bit of an announcement on April 2nd.